Hello, I'm Louis Meyers. Welcome to Meet the Author, where we talk with authors about their books and their lives. I'm really pleased today to have with us Mr. Barry Svrluga from his home in Washington, D.C. Mr. Svrluga, whose articles I've read for many, many years, has been a columnist, a reporter and columnist for the Washington Post for many years, and is now moving on to The Athletic, which is through the New York Times. By history, Mr. Svrluga was a sports writer at newspapers in Corning, New York, Portland, Maine, and Raleigh, North Carolina before joining the Washington Post in 2003. At the Post, he became the first beat writer covering the Washington Nationals when they returned to Washington, and later served as the national baseball writer. He became a columnist at the Post in 2016 and has covered many, many sports, including every Olympics dating back to 2004, most recently the Olympics in Milan Cortina. Next month, as I noted, he will join The Athletic. We're going to be talking about his book, The Grind, which is based on a year he spent with covering the Washington Nationals in the year 2014. This book is online, can be found online and in some bookstores, and is a wonderful look behind the scenes at all aspects of a professional baseball team. So Mr. Mr. Svrluga, welcome. Mr. Strasburg had a much bigger salary, I might add, but
quite a bit. Yes, thanks for having me, Louis.
Well, let's talk about baseball first, and we're going to talk about a lot of other issues in national sports scene. But was baseball your first love?
I mean, it's right up there. Kind of the romantic stuff about what it means to open a season and have that be spring. I grew up in Massachusetts, so it meant warmer days were coming. Going to Fenway Park was just such a treat. And you remember walking up, the kind of dingy walkway ramp up and seeing the Green Monster. And it really is easy to get romantic about it. There's an old adage in sports writing that the smaller the ball, the better the writing. So that leaves pretty much only golf, which I also love to cover as a better writing topic. And it's just, covering the sport is not just the game, the 9 innings that night. It's really getting into how players go about their lives, how they master their crafts, how an organization runs, how the league functions. So I just find it to be really rewarding. And because there's a game every day, there's a meaningful, you're not covering kind of just mundane practices. There's a meaningful happening every day. And it's just a ton of fun.
I should note today is April 7th. Here in Vermont, it's snowing. So perhaps Vermonters today are not thinking as acutely about baseball, but it is a sign somewhere in the nation it's not snowing and baseball's being played. And as you mentioned, spring will eventually come. Did you grow up playing sports?
I sure did, yeah. I mean, topped out in high school, but played 3 sports through high school in Massachusetts, baseball in the spring. And I remember those New England, there's nothing quite like getting a fastball off the fist and fouling it back and feeling that aluminum back ring through your freezing hands. Like I've probably never been colder than covering or playing high school baseball in New England.
A writer, a reporter?
I'm sorry?
Did you know that you wanted to be a reporter early on?
Oh, sorry, yes, I did. Kind of the very typical path for a frustrated athlete who was not going to be talented enough to play anything in college. I became the editor of my high school newspaper. I went to college and worked on the sports staff at my college paper, covering games, learning how to do it, learning from kids who were older. I didn't go to journalism school, but I knew I chose where I went to college, which was Duke, based on, well, they have a pretty good basketball team, and that might be fun to cover and follow as a sports writer. So that worked out.
So in 2014, to give a little bit of the history, Washington had had a baseball team, I think, until 1970 or 71, the woeful Washington Senators, who were moved to Arlington, Texas, became the Texas Rangers. Washington went without a baseball team for some 35 years, and it was a hole in the city, I think it's fair to say. The Montreal Expos moved to Washington in 2005, and there was a lot of excitement about that in Washington, and sold out stadiums, and the team initially did fairly well and then sort of settled into some early struggles in the ensuing years. But by 2012, they were playoff bound. And so when you saw them in 2014, they had a collection of some pretty good players. But the interesting thing about your book is you don't just focus on the star players or even the players themselves. You do, of course, talk about some of them, but you go behind the scenes, which is so interesting. Things people never see: the scouts, the general manager, the equipment people, the people that arrange for all the travel, which is a year-round endeavor, arranging for hotels and transportation, et cetera. What made you decide to look at baseball from that angle?
So it's interesting you bring it up that way because I'm glad we're talking about this book, a dozen years after it was reported, because that's what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be kind of an eternal representation of any team at any time. It happened to be the Nationals in 2014, but this is how baseball franchises function, and the roles are very distinct. I have a veteran player and how he prepares for the season, not just what he's doing that night playing third base, but what he goes through to get to that point. And in a weird way, I don't know that I would have come to understand the grind of a baseball season or come to report out a book like this if I hadn't covered the NFL for a while. I covered Washington's NFL franchise for 4 seasons after I left the Nationals beat. And it was just so striking to me that an NFL, a football week, is built as a crescendo. There's a flow and a rhythm to it, just like there's a flow and a rhythm to a baseball season. But it's much, much different than baseball in that, we don't know if the star wide receiver or star quarterback has a lousy practice on Wednesday and is ill prepared on Thursday. It's all kind of building to that 3-hour window on Sunday when they perform. For the star third baseman or pitcher, we see them a glimpse, a performance evaluation of them every night, or 6 out of 7 nights, 13 out of 14 nights. So when you have a bad practice on a Wednesday and no one knows, you can maybe recover and perform on Sunday in the NFL. For a baseball player that goes 0 for 5 with 4 strikeouts on Wednesday night, there's no place to hide. He's coming back tomorrow to try to fix himself on the fly. So I thought it was really important to shed some light into how these guys handle not just the pressures of not performing, but showing up every day and being asked to put their best effort into their job. It's so much outside of that 3-hour window between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., or I guess now with the pitch clock, 2-hour and 20-minute window, which is great. Guys get to the ballpark at 1 and 2 in the afternoon and don't leave until after 11. Like, people don't know that kind of stuff. So I thought it was really important to try to outline that.
And I think it can be really applied to almost any profession, even outside of sports. Any professional, it's almost the definition of a professional, isn't it? Preparation, training, improvement, constant improvement, and then performance. So I think there are lessons to be learned from your book in that regard. And then there's a culture, I guess, on each team. And it's interesting because players, when they get traded all the time or they're free agents, and they, as you know, they will ask other players on that other team, hey, what's it like to be over there? And often it's not just about the manager, it's about the entire organization. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Like there's 2 chapters probably that stand out in that regard. One is, and each of these chapters is labeled the character, the veteran, the reliever, the starter. There's a chapter on a baseball wife, which was Ian Desmond, was a longtime shortstop for the Nationals, went on to play for the Rangers and the Rockies. multiple-time All-Star, and just a kind of a great guy. I had known him since he was 19, and he was coming up through the Nats system, and I was the beat writer. And he was a young man who was starting a family. And one thing that's very important for baseball families, which live extremely atypical lives, is how does the ball club treat wives and families? Where do they have them sit? Do they have a room where they can go and play? Because most of these, most of the families are quite young. The children are toddlers or maybe a little bit older. And then there's, just how do you keep a family going? Well, the dad is maybe struggling at work, and what's the differences between, working a 9 to 5 job and bringing the kids to a ball game from 7 to 9:30? What are sleep patterns? All this kind of stuff is like things no one would consider. So that's one aspect of it. And then, players definitely want to know, like, what's the setup here with the clubhouse guys? How well do they take care of you? Do they have a barber come in? Are there car wash services? Just little things that can make a difference even in the lives of millionaires, because I think people sometimes resent how much money athletes make. I think when they think about that, they're not thinking about the seriousness of their preparation and the commitment to what they're doing. So all those ancillary things around the actual playing of the game really matter to these guys.
One of the people you talk about is you have a chapter on the scouts, and frankly, being a scout does not sound very appealing. It's a grinding existence of one motel after another and constantly on the road, but also the general manager. There's been a major change in the last 20-some years, as you know, in baseball, changing from sort of the scouts who see someone and predict what they're going to do versus now all the analytics that go into evaluating a potential player. That was highlighted, I think, in the movie Moneyball, starring Brad Pitt, which told the story of the Oakland Athletics and the system he put in there. What are your thoughts about analytics and the degree to which they're taking such vast importance in the game?
Well, they're not going away, and the numbers, they don't always lie, but they really kind of give us a greater glimpse of what the truth is. And I think the best organizations understand how to blend numbers with what their scouts see with their eyes. There is a human element to this game. Numbers can't tell you everything about this. You have to know who you're employing, who you're drafting, who you're putting in the lineup. But there are really, really important things that numbers can tell us. Scouts now can't just watch a hitter hit and say, wow, he hits the ball harder than anybody else. They have proof of that. What is their exit velocity? And it's a meaningful stat. Does the guy hit the ball hard frequently? But again, I think you're not going to get away from numbers, but the best organizations are really going to and evaluate the human element, because that's a human being up there down 1 run with a man on second, 3-2 in the ninth. Like that matters.
There've been some other changes in baseball recently. There was a concern that games were simply going on too long. And I think there are many reasons for that. But baseball instituted the pitch clock, I think it was either last year or the year before. That seems to have been accepted well. I think 30 seconds in between pitches. And the newest one coming down the pike now is the ABS, or automated balls and strikes, which will, to some extent, supplant the home plate umpire calling the balls and strikes. What are your thoughts on these advancements?
Well, I think it's not a stretch to say that the pitch clock went a long way towards saving baseball. And it wasn't even just that the length of games was getting north of 3 hours. It was that the time between pitches was so great that there was so much less activity than there was activity. You could watch a sitcom in between pitches for some of these guys, because they were just taking so long to get themselves in the right frame of mind. There was a little bit of pushback from pitchers who thought, this is going to cause injury because I'm being forced to throw a pitch before I'm ready. But in general, it's slashed game times. And more than that, as I said, it's slashed the time. There's more action now. It happens more quickly. There's better rhythm to it. It's the way games used to be played in the 70s and 80s, when they did only last 2 hours and change. So I think that was super duper meaningful, and important, and in some ways had to happen. And then with ABS, I mean, we're only 10 games into the season, but it's really been widely accepted and applauded. There have been some instances at games where, because they show this information on the scoreboard, like at a tennis match where they show whether a ball hit the line or not, you see the shadow, and the crowd has a reaction. The biggest cheers at some games are calls being upheld or overturned. And I think rather than looking at it as something that picks on umpires for not doing a good job, what it's highlighted is how often the umpires are actually right. It happens very quickly. Only the catcher, the pitcher, or the hitter can initiate a request to look at a call. You get 2 times in a game, and you retain those 2 times every time you're right in challenging, but they can go away. And when they go away, then you feel like you've lost something strategically for the final few innings of that game, because you don't have the right to challenge anything anymore. And maybe that's when you get burned by a bad call.
The best. Let me ask you this: best baseball movie.
Oh boy. Field of Dreams, probably, or The Natural. The Natural. I think The Natural is the best baseball
Why
movie.
was that?
Maybe. What's that?
Why did you choose The Natural?
Well, I mean, there's such good characters, and just the idea of baseball hero is almost this like mythic creature, and like there's mystery in that. There's this dark past. I mean, it's a great baseball movie because it's about a baseball player, but there's parts of it that are, the dark seediness underlying stuff is could be almost like a mob movie. So and the performances are great. So I'll stick with The Natural, although Field of Dreams is pretty darn good too.
Well, that brings up a question. These are human beings. These are young guys for the most part, trying to live their lives under a lot of pressure. As a beat writer, when you were a beat writer, that means you were with the team every day, traveling with the team, seeing behind the scenes. It must be a conflict having to sort of write about it objectively and yet liking these guys and wanting to hold their trust. How do you balance that?
It's a great question, and it's a central part of the job. Most beat writers, I think when I was doing the beat, I was probably at 145 to 50 games. You give yourself a little bit of time off, but there's a shared existence between the writers and the players, because if you're at the 9th game of a 10-game road trip, and you're about to head home, and where do you eat in the city, there's a common conversation. But you're right about the trust issue. I think beat writers have the advantage of being there every day or close to every day, and so when things go wrong, and that's written about and has to be written about, and criticism has to come, you're there the next day to answer any questions that the player has. I find that it's easier for beat writers who are around all the time to have a back and forth and an argument and a disagreement with players, because kind of both sides know that you're going to have to deal with the other one the next day and the next month and the next season. So I find like there's like an understanding of that situation that makes the existence kind of, in the best cases, really enriching. I mean, I'm in touch to this day with guys who I covered day to day on the Nationals from 20 years ago, because we shared all that time and all those experiences, and they might want to check in. The general manager that was there when I was there got fired. Like, why did that happen? They had a lot of the curiosity about the team that they used to play for, and I just kind of like keeping up with them, because now it's a different relationship. I don't have to like criticize their two strike approach. I can just be like, hey, what's up with your kids? It's kind of interesting.
I'm guessing you're on less personal basis with some of their agents.
That's not true, actually. Yeah. The agents are a key part of the business, and knowing them is really, really important in the off season when you're trying to nail down trades and free agent signings and what they're thinking. And it's a two-way street. I mean, agents want to talk to reporters who they feel like are plugged in on a certain team or in a certain situation, because they can get a little bit more of an independent assessment of, like, what do you think of the situation there, the coaching staff or the front office or that kind of thing. When the Washington Post closed its sports department in February, I heard, as did all of my colleagues, from all sorts of people from their past. But some of the best calls were from some of the agents that I've dealt with over the years, who were just curious on a human level. So don't paint them out to be the bad guy all the time.
Well, thank you for standing up to them, for them. Let's talk about more general issues, some of the other sports and more general issues. You also mentioned that you enjoy golf. You've covered golf. Golf has gone through its own difficulties in the last 5 years with the LIV. I don't even remember what that stands for, but that was a splinter group started by Greg Norman, I believe, which has siphoned off some of the best of the pros into this league, which is somewhat ersatz. What's going to happen with that? Does it have a future, or will it reunite with the PGA?
So it's complicated, and there was an agreement, what they call the framework agreement, between the PGA Tour and Live Golf. And Live, by the way, is if you look at the Roman numerals, it's Roman numeral 54. They were going to be 54 hole events. They've since gone to 72 in an admission that their tournaments were not viewed as serious 4-round tournaments that golf fans are used to. A major star from Live came back to the PGA Tour this year, Brooks Koepka. He's a 5-time major winner. He had to pay a fine to come back, and doesn't have some of the money pot available to him in the early part of his return. But it is a question, like, there's still big stars on Live. People do not watch that circuit dated week to week like they do the PGA Tour. I think the PGA Tour is lacking for some of those stars who have left. Jon Rahm, probably, and Bryson DeChambeau, foremost among them. This week is the Masters. The Live players can play at the majors, so this is one of the few times you get to see them all together, and that's kind of made the majors more special. But I think the reason Live can survive to this point is because it is funded completely by Saudi Arabian oil money, and that is almost literally a bottomless pit of cash that, in my view, is dirty money given the human rights record of that government. But they can keep throwing money at the problem, don't really care how much they're spending. So in a way, success is almost not measurable in the ways that we would normally measure it, because they're using it to promote their brand and their society.
Leaving aside the sort of the greed of perhaps of some of these mega millionaires and the Saudi situation, I mean, pro tennis players have also had some of the same complaints that golfers have, which is that they are being forced to play too many events at too high a level per year, and there are sort of injuries resulting that are limiting their careers or shortening their careers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you see that throughout sports now, that training is at such a level that you would think you'd be building more durable athletes. But, it's rare that an NBA player ever plays 82 games anymore, which used to be, you show up and you play. Tennis is a brutal sport on the body. And I think it's part of a larger discussion and realization for athletes that, the leagues aren't the product. The athletes are the product. There's no league or TV show or entertainment product to put in front of thousands of people unless the athletes are there to play. So they should come first. And I think there's a realization over the last decade that the athletes have to take that to the leagues and make them understand that. It goes to college sports where, there's been a major revolution because the players who produce the product are finally getting paid in a multi-billion-dollar industry, as they should. Is it always clean? Does it always is the evolution always without hiccups? No. And I think we're going to see some more changes in college sports too. But I think across the board, the athletes are realizing and thinking they should be rewarded for putting the work they do in and producing a product that people want to consume.
Let's talk about college sports since there have been huge changes in the last 5 to 10 years in the college sports. We now have transfer portals where some athletes change every year at college. It's hard to imagine that their academics follow them with that. There's the NIL, which is the name, image, likeness, in which athletes are paid, essentially become professional athletes in college. And then there's the conference realignments where you have schools chasing the big pots of money, and therefore you have Stanford, I think, is now in the ACC or something, Atlantic Coast Conference. So where does it end?
Well, I mean, I think you're not putting the genie back in the bottle here. It's important, as I said, to understand that the athletes are the ones who are producing the product, and there's no reason for the football coach at Clemson to make $9 million while his star quarterback, who's winning him a national championship, makes $0. That just doesn't make any sense. So I think we have to come to an understanding that these players are producing a product that people value, that television networks pay billions of dollars for, and that they should receive some of that money, if not the lion's share of that money. And that's what we're seeing now. The transfer portal is difficult because it does introduce the idea that these guys are free agents, or women too, are free agents every year. They can sign to the highest bidder every year. The academics, of course, I think you have to put to the side. I think it should be looked at as if a college athlete wants to use the opportunity to go to school and get an education, he or she should do that, but it shouldn't be required. They're professionals. They're putting so much work into their craft that, this idea that they're putting on a sweater and a leather sweater and going to class for 8 hours a day and just working 2 hours on their sport, like that's not how it works. The where does it end question, I mean, I don't think we know that. This is really very, very fluid. I think the transfer portal, there is something to like, hey, should we put a cap on how many times you can transfer? But that I find difficult too, because once you start managing what the athletes can do for the sake of the product, you're taking away some of the rights that athlete should have as the producer of the product. So super complicated. People a lot brighter than me are trying to work on it. But in the end, you get an NCAA tournament, men's basketball tournament, and women's basketball tournament that are very exciting and people love. They're still going to keep turning it on.
There is another huge problem now in the sports world, and that's gambling, which is now the Supreme Court has stepped in, I think, and allowed legalized gambling. And so states have jumped on this, and gambling is part of almost every sport now, almost every aspect of life. And it seems like some of the conferences and sports teams and networks have aligned themselves with gambling organizations. How do you see it affecting the sports world?
Well, I mean, I think it's twofold, or maybe even threefold. It can be dangerous because the discourse around a sports event and around athletes has changed, because fans now can yell at the right fielder saying, I have $20 for you to hit a home run tonight. I'm gonna, X, Y, and Z you unless you hit a home run. Golfers get it because they're right there. Hey, Jim, I've got you to lead the tournament after one round. What are you doing making bogey? Like, this actually happens, and it's a problem for athletes. So that's one aspect, just in terms of behavior around an event. I think there's a consumer aspect too, in that I've seen kids that I know in my neighborhood who they have fantasy football teams, or they're maybe putting a little wager on an over/under number in a football game. And I'll say, oh yeah, who ended up winning that game? And they don't really know. Like, they know how their players performed for their fantasy team, or they know whether the bet that they made came through, and they lose what we're really supposed to be there for, which is the competition and the team that you back, and what's happening in the standings, and what does the batting title race look like? All that stuff that we used to care about kind of goes away, and we see the sport through a different prism. And you're totally right that leagues have not only, that they used to swear gambling was awful for them, they now partner with these apps and sites, because there's money to be made, and there's money to be, if they make their product available to those sites, they're going to make a cut of that, and that not only lifts the league, but because the players in these unionized leagues get a percentage of the revenue, it helps lift up the players too. So it's another thing. I don't think the toothpaste is going back in the tube, but I do have more of a concern about it day to day, because just how we think about sports is kind of being changed before our eyes.
Not to mention the increase in gambling addiction,
Addiction is, I should have mentioned that for sure.
causing particularly younger people and older people to go into huge amounts of debt, lose their life savings, etc. Well, it sounds like we're talking about lots of problems. I'm going to bring up one more, and it sort of ties in with some of what you said. You just mentioned the kids who are gambling now. Youth sports. When I grew up, and it sounds like when you grew up, kids played 3 sports a year. Kids who were interested in being athletic would go out and play 3 sports a year. And now more and more kids are focusing on one sport. They're training year-round. They're getting better at it at an earlier age. But there's a price to be paid, it seems to me, not only in sort of chronic injuries such as elbow injuries and shoulder injuries in baseball players, et cetera, but just in lost opportunity to enjoy other sports. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it's not a new problem. I mean, I think I remember writing about this a quarter century ago, when kids were, specializing and choosing one sport at 10, when, you really don't need to do that in most cases until you're out of high school and you're a recruitable athlete. I think the athletes that I know that did play 2 or 3 sports coming up, they speak all the time about how beneficial it was for them. It made them more well-rounded physically. Like, they weren't just using all the same muscles all the time. They were training in different ways for different sports, which they feel like gave them a better base. And I think, specialization, when it's done because the kid wants to do it, that's fine. But if you see the love of a game going away from a kid at a pretty young age, because baseball isn't just contained to the spring anymore, it's coming through the summer, and we're going to have a fall season, because I feel like if I don't play for this coach in the fall, he's not going to put me on his team in the spring. Like, that's a terrible cycle to be in, and it doesn't give them a mental break from the sport either. Like, baseball demands different things than playing football or running cross country or playing basketball does. There's different things mentally. So I think we all kind of sound like old men in saying, well, I used to play 3 sports, and I think that really helped me. But I think there's truth in it too, and I think it's a shame when the joy of some sports are taken away from kids, when in the interest of saying you're going to master this one, when really only a tiny percentage of kids are going to master that one enough to be a professional player.
And that, it brings up an issue of basketball and football in particular have a great cachet, particularly in America in general, in urban and underserved areas. And kids sort of fantasize about being in the NFL, where very few make it, and the average career is about 4 years, or the NBA, where it's even less likely to make an NBA team. And yet baseball, if you're a good athlete, it's always seemed to me they have so many levels of minor leagues. You can become a professional athlete on some level in baseball. It seems to me a bit easier than basketball or football, or even hockey.
Remind yourself that the wages in the minors are not going to it's in some ways not a livable wage. If you didn't
Right.
get a bonus because you're drafted high, that you can't. It's a difficult existence because you really should be getting a job in the off season, and you're going to have to. You should be spending that time, preparing for the next season and trying to get better. So that's very, very difficult. I also would say baseball has become an elite sport because it's so expensive to play. You're expected to have these expensive bats, these expensive gloves. The playing fields are expensive to maintain, so it's increasingly, the only decent ball fields are in affluent suburbs. It's a suburban sport, a rich suburban sport, because that's who can afford these travel teams that kids get on. And so the trickle down is it's harder to find urban, diverse young baseball stars because the infrastructure is harder to find in those areas. There's been kind of a bifurcation in that way.
We also know, though, that the risk of injury, as we've learned particularly in football, but also in hockey, sort of chronic head injuries are much more common in those sports than basketball or baseball. If you had perhaps you do have children, but if they wanted to be a professional athlete, is there one sport you would steer them away from at this point?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is football because of what we know about CTE and head injuries and concussions. I think that's, it's still being explored, but there's a lot of data and a lot of cases now where they've studied the brains of deceased former football players who suffered concussions. And we know not only did it contribute to their deaths in some cases, but it also made the latter part of their lives difficult, depressing in some cases. So that's the easy and obvious answer. It doesn't mean it's the wrong answer, for sure. I have, just from a kind of playful financial standpoint, have advocated for baseball as a career if you were choosing between sports, because there's the opportunity for real longevity there. Major League Baseball players by default make millions of dollars. So if you become a 10-year veteran, 15-year veteran, you're going to make $100 or more million. I mean, that's not a reason to choose a sport, or you shouldn't really make life choices at age 12 based on the many millions you might make by the time you're 35. But if you run the numbers, baseball can become very, very lucrative, because not only do the star players make quite a bit of money, you can find a role where if you're around in the big leagues for 10 or 15 years, you're living pretty comfortably.
And many of the contracts are guaranteed, whereas it seems like football, it's so many one-year contracts. If you get hurt, you're done.
The baseball contract is what you see is what you get. You're making that money if you sign that deal. Football is not. There's all sorts of hidden outs for the team, and it just, when you hear a 4-year, $80 million NFL contract, check the fine print, because that's probably not what's guaranteed in there.
Bit of a
Whereas baseball, that's what's guaranteed.
bait and switch. In the time we have left, I want to move to the broader scope of journalism. And we know that you've been with the Washington Post for many years. Washington Post, in my opinion, had the best sports writing department in the country. Jeff Bezos, who is the owner of the Washington Post, for the first 10 years seemed to sort of be hands-off, but is now very much hands-on. And the Washington Post sports department was closed. All the sports writers are now seeking other work, and fortunately have found it in many cases. The same was true for the book world and the Washington Post. But when you look at newspapers today, what is the future? Not just for your sports journalism, but for journalism in general.
Well, I mean, I think you have to look at it almost the opposite way. Like, how are people consuming news and information? And if that's not from the written word in traditional journalism stories, then, is it incumbent upon us to think about different ways to deliver news? I happen to love reading news. I grew up delivering the Boston Globe on my bike and coming home and opening the sports section with all those great writers back then, as I had my breakfast before I went to school. In some ways, that world is gone. People wake up and they get on their phones, and what's the first thing that they're doing? I'm not sure. Is it playing the Wordle? Is it checking their email, looking at Instagram? It is my belief that great writing will still bring readers, and not just great writing, but unique stories. I know that, in an analytically driven world, at the Washington Post at the end of every year, I would look at everything I had written and rank it by what got the most readers. And you can learn from that. What you learn is that when you have something that nobody else has, when you've broken a story, or you've gotten a subject to open up in a way that other people haven't, people will come and find that material. So that's what I hope to do going forward. I always wanted to do it for the rest of my life at the Washington Post. That opportunity wasn't afforded me, so I'll take that effort elsewhere.
There's also the aspect of local news that can get lost. The Washington Post, for example, would rank the teams during football season, rank teams during basketball season, and other teams. And there was and they would produce local team scores. So unfortunately, some of that will probably be lost as well. And that's something that brings the community together.
Yeah, I think that kind of reporting is going to land elsewhere in the DC region. It won't be packaged in the Washington Post like it did. But I think the larger point is that when we lost our sports department, and when there were major changes to the Post in general, including letting go of many, many, many Metro reporters and editors. There was a personal loss because I lost my job, but I think the loss for a community is much more profound. It is the newspaper, while you might love it or hate it, is a gathering place. It's an information dispersal device. But it's something, oh, did you see that in the paper? Oh, that football team moved up to number 2 in the ranking this week. I think they're not any better than the 7th team, best team. And then, there's the very, very traditional journalistic mission of holding leaders to account. When there are fewer reporters trying to cover City Hall or the school board or whatever, there's much more room for nefarious things to happen. So I think any community that has a strong local news, whether it's a website or a newspaper or a TV station, doing good work, holding people to account, is a stronger community overall.
We should probably remember that Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein were Metro reporters at the Washington Post, covering Washington, D.C. local issues when they happened to stumble upon the beginnings of the Watergate conspiracy. So without them, who knows what might have happened. At any rate, we're almost done. I did want to ask you one final question. When we had Dr. Anthony Fauci here earlier this year, I asked him, based on his memoir, he had talked about his love of baseball, if he would have liked, what sport he would have liked to have been a professional athlete in. I'm going to ask you the same question. You played a number of sports, you covered them all. If you had the athletic ability to be a star in any sport, what would you choose?
I think it would be golf, because it's the one you can take into your old age. And as a frustrated, poor golfer, I would love to know what it was like to be really, really good at something I struggle with on a daily or weekly basis. I like the game because of the social aspect. I like the competitive aspect. I like competing against the course and yourself. And as someone who's closer to the end of my career than the beginning, I like the fact that I feel like I'll be able to do it well into my old age. So maybe an atypical answer, because holding a Super Bowl trophy or a World Series trophy sounds pretty good. But I would love to know what it was like to shoot 67 in a major championship.
Well, you still have some career ahead of you, and I'm glad that you'll be at The Athletic. I want to again mention the book, The Grind, which can be found on online or in your bookstore. Are there any other books in your immediate future?
I worked on a book with a golf psychologist named Julie Elion, and that book is coming out in June. It'll be called Mastering Your Mental Game, and it's a great companion for anybody who's struggled mentally on the golf course to try to figure out what are some tips and maybe touchstones that you can go back to get yourself into a better frame of mind mentally on the golf course, and really, honestly, in your day-to-day life at home and professionally. So it was fun to do, and I'm excited for it to come out.
Well, we'll look for that book, and hopefully in the next month, the snow will end here in Vermont, spring will come, baseball season has already started, and the golf courses will reopen. But I want to thank Mr. Barry Svrluga for being with us today. Wish him all the best in his new setting at the Athletic, and thank you for being with us today, and we will see you next time.